Alen Babic walked straight through Shawndell Winters in 2 rounds. Now, going into the fight, based upon what Winters had done in the Joseph Parker fight, I expected this to be a competitive bout because he went 5 rounds with Joseph Parker and he actually gave Parker some issues in that fight. Given the fact that Babic doesn't have Parker's pedigree, doesn't have Parker's experience either as a pro or even as an amateur, because Parker was an experienced international amateur. Alen Babic, to my knowledge, wasn't, and certainly wasn't an experienced pro. So for him to go in there and blast the guy out in 2 rounds and have absolutely no trouble at all, a guy who went 5 with Parker and gave Parker some issues, that's impressive. Now, Babic seems very rudimentary. He's basic. He comes forward and swings wide hooks. He keeps his head down. He applies a lot of pressure. And there appears to be a decent amount of power in his shots. But truth be told, Shawndell Winters weighed in 6 pounds under the cruiserweight limit. Babic himself was only 5 pounds over it. And if you look at Babic's body, he was quite soft at 205 pounds. So he could easily lose, a few extra pounds and make cruiserweight without any kind of trouble at all. But he is fixated on becoming heavyweight champion and challenging, many of the top heavyweights. So that's the route he's decided to go. He's not worried about what he weighs. His what's the word I'm looking for? Idol is Joe Frazier. He models himself on Frazier, and you can see that in the way that he fights. He doesn't have the bobbing and the bobbing and weaving of Joe Frazier, and that's something he'll definitely need to work on if he really wants to make a go of it in the heavyweight division. He's going to need to start bobbing and weave. At cruiserweight, generally the guys are not as tall, they're not as physically strong, etc. So it's good to bob and weave at cruiserweight too with his kind of style, but it's not going to hurt him as much as it will at heavyweight if he isn't moving his head correctly. Yeah, because once he gets in there with one of these big, powerful heavyweights who can move a bit, stick a jab on him, they can calm him down quick. Okay? Even if he might have a good chin, they're going to be able to bust him up. They're going to be able to hurt him and all that kind of business. So, yes, it was an impressive display by Alen Babic, just walking straight through Winters, never gave him time to set up and think about things. And you see, that's where Winters started having success against Parker, because Parker, Parker isn't a pressure fighter, first of all. Doesn't have the same kind of dimensions of Babic. His hooks are probably not quite as, Babic's hooks are not tight. They're actually pretty wide. But he's not maybe as good at pinning the opponent down as Alen Babic is and just throwing steady punches. Joseph Parker tends to fight in spurts, these fast, explosive bursts, whereas Babic is somebody who just keeps the pressure on you constantly and the punch volume stays at a steady pace, which is a pretty high pace, but it's, it doesn't really dip, at least not for the first couple rounds. Whereas Parker fights in bursts, then he stops for a little bit, has a look at you, moves around, tries to fire a jab. And in those moments, in those lulls in the action, that's where Winters was able to get his own shots off and give Parker some problems. Yeah, whereas Babic doesn't give you those moments to get your own shots off. He's just on you constantly. And he walks straight through Shawndell Winters. Impressive. Yeah. And, going into the fight, I was expecting something competitive based on what Winters did against Parker. Also for the fact that Babic is an unknown quantity. This is not a guy who was some renowned, amateur that we've all heard of, who's won the world championships or won the Olympic games. No, this wasn't some amateur I'd ever heard of. And as a pro, he hadn't done anything, 3-0. The guy's basically a cruiserweight. Okay. He's not like Michael Hunter, who'd given Usyk a tough fight at cruiserweight, who'd moved up and stopped Martin Bakole. No, Babic didn't have any kind of grounding or background like that. So, yeah, for him to do what he did, I was impressed. From a technical point of view, he's raw, he's rugged, he's crude, but that might get him to a certain level. We'll see. What level that is exactly, I don't know. But see, the thing about Babic is that he has a lot of self-belief and a lot of conviction. He fights the way he fights, and he's unapologetic about it. He's not worried about getting in there against really big heavyweights. I mean, the reason that Dillian Whyte signed him is because he brought this guy in for sparring, just some generic Eastern European guy he was thinking, and Babic tried to take Dillian Whyte's head off. And it was absolute war in sparring, okay? So clearly he's not going to be intimidated. He's not that kind of character to be intimidated. He believes in himself. And that belief can take you a long way. Yeah, even if you are a small, crude heavyweight like this, I mean, I wouldn't underestimate him. That's all I'm saying. Based upon what I've seen, he doesn't look like he's going to be world heavyweight champion or dominate the division if you just concentrate on his technique and his size. But there are intangibles. So I wouldn't write Babic off completely in terms of being a player at the top level in heavyweight boxing. Yeah, we need to see a lot more. Don't get it twisted. It's far too early for me to jump out the window and say, yeah, this guy can be a serious contender. But I wouldn't write him off completely at all. I don't think for Babic to some stage pick up a version of the heavyweight title, that's not beyond the realms of possibility. Right? It doesn't seem likely at the moment based on what we're seeing, but stranger things have happened in boxing, trust me. So anyway, good performance by Alen Babic, and the most important thing for his career in the short term is that he is already becoming a fan favorite in the UK. Now, the one issue that he, may encounter is if Dillian Whyte doesn't win the Povetkin rematch. Because at the moment, Babic has been fighting on Dillian Whyte undercards. He's managed by Dillian Whyte. Hopefully, Eddie Hearn reaches out to Whyte, reaches out to Babic and says, come and fight on some of my other shows without Dillian. I know Babic says he's very loyal to Dillian and all this kind of stuff, but he has to think about his own career. At the end of the day, yes, Dillian Whyte is helping Babic out to some degree, but he's also making money out of him being his manager. So as a fighter, you have to have a certain degree of selfishness. Yeah, Dillian Whyte might be more trustworthy than, let's say, Eddie Hearn, if you're Alen Babic, because Dillian Whyte is a fighter. You've been in the ring with him. You've traded punches. You have a certain level of respect for a fellow fighter who you've swapped leather with that you wouldn't necessarily have for an Eddie Hearn or a Frank Warren. And I get that. But you have a certain degree of loyalty as well for a guy who is bringing you onto his shows, getting you paid a lot more money than you're used to being paid, giving you limelight and spotlight. Do you understand? So I get why Babic would be more loyal to Dillian than you would be to a normal promoter, 100%. But at the same time, Dillian needs to understand that Babic should be getting out as often as possible as an upcoming heavyweight. And, I'm sure there won't be any issue. Here's me acting like just in case there's an issue. I'm sure there won't be any issue, but he needs to be getting out on Eddie Hearn shows when Dillian Whyte isn't top of the bill. In fact, he probably has already in some of these other shows, to be fair. But he needs to be getting out as much as possible. And the point I was making is, if Dillian Whyte ends up losing to Povetkin in the rematch, his management might just fall into disarray. This does tend to happen with certain fighters. David Haye was promoting and, I believe managing certain fighters earlier on in David Haye's career, at least a couple times under Haymaker Promotions. But when David Haye lost, let's say, to Tony Bellew, all of a sudden the fighters he was working with, like Joe Joyce and everybody else, they were seemingly forgotten about. They didn't have the platform to fight on David Haye's undercards anymore because he's was retiring. And therefore, when David Haye's stock dropped, staying with David Haye, your stock drops and your opportunities dry up if you stay with him after he's been knocked out by Tony Bellew the second time. Do you understand? So that is the precarious situation that Babic, Chris Kongo, and other Dillian Whyte heavyweights might be in. It all depends on how robust Dillian Whyte's management company is. Whether it's really just all about Dillian Whyte, or whether, irrespective of what happens to Dillian Whyte in his career, they're going to keep that management company going regardless. It depends how robust the company is and what it's really all about. If it's like a David Haye promotion company or management company, it's not really worth much, is it? Because Haye, it was just all about him. Yeah, he was bringing some people along with him, but when he fell, the whole thing fell. Is that going to be the case with Dillian Whyte? That's what Alen Babic at least needs to keep in the back of his mind, because he has to worry about what's best for his career and where he's going. So let's hope there's no issue there and that he can get out as regular as possible and build his fan base in the UK. And I'm sure he's going to have a growing fan base over there in Croatia too, because they're going to be seeing some of these fights that are happening on these big shows that Alen Babic is involved in. And obviously he's been calling out his countryman, Filip Hrgovic. He's called him out several times now, said he'd love to fight him. That is also going to cause waves in his native country of Croatia. So yeah, I think this guy could develop into a bit of a star in the way that Dave Allen is a star. So whereby he's not really a star, but he has like a cult following in British boxing. Yeah. And by the way, I think Alen Babic may have the potential to be a lot better than Dave Allen. So I'm not saying that he can only reach Allen's level. I just mean in terms of building up that cult following, he might be able to do something similar. Some people have compared him to Chisora. He's probably more crude than Chisora, truth be told. He's smaller and more crude, but I can see where the comparison is coming from. And in fact, some people are saying that they'd like to see him in with Dave Allen next. Babic himself says he wants to be moved fast. So I personally think that's a good fight. Dillian Whyte's other heavyweight, what's his name now? I've forgotten his name. Oh God, his name escapes me. Fabio Wardley, excuse me. Fabio Wardley, he had a good win the other week, and people were also linking him to Dave Allen, including myself. So they need to decide within that particular team who's going to get that Dave Allen fight. Will it be Babic or will it be Fabio Wardley? I think it's a good fight for either of them. And some people, of course, are going to say Babic and Wardley should fight each other. But given the fact they're both managed by the same person or company, I doubt that will happen for now. But yeah, Babic versus Dave Allen, I think, is a good fight. And it's a fight that Dave Allen might take. Because when Dave Allen looks at Daniel Dubois, or even when he looks at Fabio Wardley, he sees people that are technically superior to him. And they're bigger and taller and all that kind of stuff. Whereas with Alen Babic, here's a guy who isn't technically superior from what we've seen so far to Dave Allen. And he's smaller than Dave Allen in terms of his weight and his height. So this is a fight that Dave Allen might actually fancy. I know Dave Allen is a bit bougie now and, he likes to get paid more money than some people think he's worth. But let's see what happens. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do you like Alen Babic? Were you impressed by his performance against Shawndell Winters, getting him out of there much quicker than Parker did without any issues? What do you think his ceiling is? How far do you think he can go? And who would you like to see him in with next? Is it Dave Allen? And how do you see the Dave Allen fight going if he does take it? Let me know in the comment section below. It's happening. I'm out.